Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to talk about today we're going to continue in Unit 6, Industrial and Economic Development. So in our previous videos we were looking at the Human Development Index, ways to talk about development and ways to describe various levels of development in the world. And today we're just going to continue on with that concept. But really what we're just going to look at is some other ways that we could discuss and describe development. And I'm going to show you some of the different charts and graphs and things that we can look at from the Human Development Human Development Index website, as well as the Gapminder website, which I think are both great resources for you to consider and look at as you think about the idea of development and what are some different indicators we can look at to discuss development. So here's just a list of a couple of things that we could discuss when we're looking at the development of different countries. In the way that we could describe development, because again, the ones that we looked at, they're not the only ways. We could look at a variety of other indicators to look at the development of the world and where countries are going, what direction they're headed in. I think it's important to remember that really no one indicator is going to be the single only indicator that we can look at. We can look at a variety of different indicators. Plus, various indicators are going to give us different ideas on how countries are doing and in what areas they're improving. Because, of course, most countries have at least a couple areas that they could improve in order to reach kind of the ideal concept of development. So here's just a list of a couple things, and we'll go look at the websites and look at how the charts and graphs change based on the data we look at. So the first one there is the amount of raw materials that a country has access to. Now the idea there is that if a country has access to raw materials, then they have some tradable goods that they could then develop and then sell those on the international market. So at least there's some potential for growth there if they have access to raw materials. And of course, depending on the raw material that they have is going to make a great difference. Obviously, something like access to petroleum is going to be of much greater value than access to potatoes. But again, it still gives the country a starting point. The consumer goods that are available and sold within the country. Clearly, the larger the number of consumer goods that are available, the better developed the country is, because the wealthier the population is, the more things that they can afford. And then, obviously, the better that the economy is going to be typically overall. You could look at the number of TVs and radios per person, and you probably want to update that today and now start looking at the number of cell phones per person. Obviously, TVs and radios, those are some of the more basic forms of electronic communication and electronic dissemination of information, displays of entertainment and things like that. And so, I'd say pretty much in most parts of the world today, you can go and you can find TVs and radios. But think beyond the actual TV and radio, but actually think about the infrastructure that's necessary to transmit the signals for the TVs and the radios, so that people could actually utilize those in their locations. You can also do things like equality. So you have things like women's rights that you could look at in terms of what kind of access do women have to society in general, what type of access do they have to jobs, getting an education, how long do they stay in school. One of the conversations in the United States today is about the wage gap. Regardless of how you feel about that, that's a conversation, and people look at that and say that's a part of women's rights, and it could be an indicator in terms of social element of development. So if we go to the various websites that I was just discussing a second ago, so if we look at like Gapminder, again, you have down here on the horizontal axis income per person, per capita. Come over to the vertical axis. You could look at all these different indicators. You could look at, you have the list here of life expectancy, children per woman, and well, it looks like it's going to, oh, there it goes, okay. And so, again, you could look at this in terms of what does it tell you about development, the number of children per woman that people are having based upon income. You could look at the countries in the world and, where those different regions and countries are at. You could look at life expectancy, which I think is what we were just on, wasn't it? Nope, never mind. Okay, and again, I think we talked about this last time in terms of how high life expectancy has gotten. Looking at the environment in terms of emissions and pollution, forestry, and in terms of the amount of forests that are being cut down. Talk about access to water, health, the infrastructure that's available in a country. All these are going to be different indicators that you can look at to use to discuss development, to get a better sense for how developed countries are. Same thing with the Human Development Index website. you look over here to the left-hand side, you have all these different categories that data has been collected on. And I thought this was a pretty interesting one. Talk about the population of urban, the percentage of the population that's urban. You look at this on the scores of the Human Development Index. The more developed the country is, with the exception of a couple, looks like maybe Trinidad and Tobago, you have a very nice positive correlation here. And you've discussed that through the year in terms of typically as the country develops, more people start moving to cities. But then again, we talked about counter-urbanization as well. You just have all these different topics, and we obviously don't have time to go through all of this today. But it'd be a great thing for you to do, maybe in your class or on your own time, to just kind of peruse through some of these indicators and think about what is that going to tell you about. What is that going to tell you about level development, child labor? That'll be kind of interesting. Again, a negative correlation. Let's see, who needs to work on Peru? Looks like Peru needs to work on their child labor participation. Don't want, was that 33.5? I'm guessing 33.5%. Maybe, I'm not exactly sure what the indicator is based on. But anyway, I guess we could look here at our description somewhere in here. So anyway, again, I would just encourage you to go through there. And there's a lot of different indicators and information that's been tabulated and put there for you in fairly easy access. Look at that. There's this definition right there. Okay, maybe I could go look at that. Maybe we'll look at that later so that I don't take up too much of your time. No, I want to look at it now. Percentage of children ages 5 to 11 who during the reference week did at least 1 hour of economic activity. So Peru, we're calling you out, Peru. You need to get on the ball. Not make your kids work so much. All right, and then some other ways that you could look at it. That's not exactly what I was looking for, but there are some other ways that you can look at this data. You can look at it. You can look at it on a map. You can look at it as a choropleth map, and I'm not going to go through all of that right now. I don't want to waste too much of your time. But you can look at that on a choropleth map, and I'll give you a nice idea of the spatial distribution of. Different areas of development. So that might be something interesting for you to look at if you have the time or the inclination. Yes, and we do have a quiz Ferret today, so for those of you who are looking forward to that. Another indicator that's been developed is what's called the Big Mac Index. This is kind of an interesting one. So basically the idea is what is the cost of a Big Mac across the world? And it's very similar to the idea of purchasing power parity. Because the cost of the Big Mac is not so much as important as it is what is the cost of the Big Mac versus the amount of money that people have. Because even if the Big Mac is cheaper, if the income levels of that country are less than the actual proportion of the proportion of the income that the Big Mac takes up actually becomes larger, and so it ends up making it more expensive. So. Again, it's supposed to be similar to PPP or purchasing power parity to give us an idea of how strong that currency is and the different things that it can buy. So anyway, here's an example that was given. And this data is from several years ago, so I'm sure it's changed a bit. In fact, I haven't bought a Big Mac in a long time. In fact, the last time I bought cheeseburgers regularly from McDonald's, cheeseburgers costed me 69 cents. So anyhow, moving on. In Thailand, you see there, the Big Mac costs about $1.78. So you might sit there thinking, wow, that's a great deal for a Big Mac, because in the United States, the Big Mac costs $3.22. So what's the deal? Well, look at this. The average income of someone living in Thailand was $8,440, whereas the average income of the American, which has increased by now, was $42,000. So you look at the percentage of the income that the Big Mac takes up, the $1.78 to $8,440 to $3.22 to $42,000. Obviously, the percentage of income is much less for the American Big Mac than the Thai Big Mac. And so again, that gives you an idea of what this concept of PPP or purchasing power parity is. It gives us an idea of the strength of the currency. And now we have time for a quiz Ferret. Quiz Ferret. Our dear little furry friend has popped his head up out of the ground and he has a question for us, so let's see what he has. Question is, the Big Mac Index is used as another way to represent what economic concept? And I was just talking about this, so hopefully you're paying attention. The answer is PPP, or purchasing power parity. So anyway, that's all that we have time for today. I hope you found that to be helpful. I hope you do go check out the Gapminder website, the UNHDI website, just to get a little bit better understanding of those different economic indicators and how they relate to development. So as always, if you have any comments, leave those in the comment box below, and I hope to see you next time.